Orb on the movements of the earth is considered by some as a hidden gem of the season. To put it simply, it's a story about science and religion.
何を捧げればこの世のすべてを知れる
Our main character in the first episode is a 12-year-old kid who aims to live rationally and have a stable life. So he follows the will of his adoptive father and pursues the study of theology. This life decision doesn't come out of a vacuum. He experienced poverty when he was an orphan. He knows what it means to be miserable. Not only that, he witnesses the consequence of defying the church order in front of his eyes. But his pursuit of stability doesn't last long. One day, he has a chance to see a heretic. The heretic forces him to observe the star at night. From then on, we all know his life trajectory has been altered. He has the taste of the forbidden fruit. He's willing to abandon all his previous beliefs because he discovered the word heliocentrism. All this happened within just one episode. Not 3, not 5, just 1. The idea of heliocentrism is so powerful that the mere exchange of dialogue within a few sentences is enough to entice a person to change his core value. In fact, heliocentrism is a powerhouse of the story. It governs the interactions of every major exchange. Therefore, the story of Orb should be described as an idea-driven narrative. If you have seen the anime, you know that every little backstory of the characters serve to promote how obsessive they are with the topic of heliocentrism. They can support it or oppose it, but none can exist without thinking about it. This pursuit of knowledge can help you overcome the grief of losing family and rejection from your family. In this sense, even family is used to set off the importance of astronomy. It is not used for you to understand the social life of the characters. They have no social life. And I meant that in a literal sense. The young kid is never shown playing with others even when he is at the right age to do so, while the adults never have any other kind of hobby. Even when characters are having a drink after a long day of work, it still somehow get redirected to the topic of planetary motion. People die trying to defend the cause, and some die knowing they will never be right. The cosmological topic is so intriguing that the character, Ozi, starts to learn how to write and read so that he can one day publish a story about how they figured out the Earth revolves around the Sun. A story that writes its own story. Now that got my interest. To write a new story like this, the easiest way is to follow the general formula of storytelling, having a central conflict to hook the audience. In this case, it's the struggle to reveal the true nature of the universe. In this story, those who have no power, who are outside of the system, are seen as radical who promote dangerous ideas, while those who are within the system either get portrayed as strong oppressor or active reformer who are unwilling to be forgotten by history.
このままでは近いうちに対抗勢力によって教会正統派は崩れるぞそしたら私の核も落ちるではないか
Consequence of the conflict between the theory of geocentrism and heliocentrism can be best explained by this scene in episode 8.
そりゃ大混乱でしょう。教会の教えに反してる。広まったら権威も前提も崩れます。世界は今のままでいられなくなる。
These notions of new free ideas can cause the fall of society is nothing new. It's similar to the difference between Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Hobbes proposed the idea of absolute monarchy because, without the role of central authority, people will fall into chaos. On the other hand, Rousseau favored direct democracy and advocated freedom and equality. So, I want to use this opportunity to talk about the French Revolution and the Enlightenment. The French Revolution is thought of by many as a movement which was Rousseauian by nature. It was heavily influenced by the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment was caused by the scientific revolution. So it's not that far off to talk about the story of Orb and the revolution at the same time. Even the word Enlightenment fits with the concept of the anime. It has the meaning to enable someone to see, to illuminate the dark. There's no better physical representation of this idea than observing the stars at night, extending our eyes to space to see the true underlying nature. Now looking back at episode 8, it's obvious that the Emperor's new clothes dangle before swords get drawn. The so-called chaos is not caused by physical force. It's caused by
真理は支配できない。
神と真理のためなら引きたくない。
私は真理にたどり着く。
It's a value that motivates adults and children, from illiterates to literates, and from man to woman. And you know they are engaging in important discussion because the background has special effects.
でもそれは僕が動いたからで。
血です。
俺は今満ちた金星が見たいってことです。
It's like a canned laughter,
I'm kidding around, of course.
enforcing meaning regardless of the subjective emotion. It runs parallel with how we think the general public had perceived the French Revolution before it happened. This is why I want to talk about an interesting study that the French scholar Daniel Monet did. He searched the catalog of 500 private libraries before the revolution. He collected 20,000 books, and out of those 20,000, the social contract by Rousseau only appeared once. So according to his research, the conclusion is no one was actually inspired by Rousseau, because no one was reading him. The study came out 100 years ago, and since then a lot of people have found flaws in his research. In spite of that, it still sparks a whole new way of approach to understanding how people think in the past. We reimagine what they were thinking by reading what they read. The scholar Robert Downton is perhaps the perfect candidate to use this research method, because he was once the director of a library, not just any library, but the Library of Harvard. And if you know something about Harvard, you would know the motto of the university is the Latin word Veritas, which literally means
真理だ。
They tried to see how many people had read Rousseau's by searching number of forbidden books before the revolution. He found out that in order to publish these books, publishers would use the name philosophical books as a secret signal for trading under the counter. In these collections of philosophical books, you will be able to find Rousseau and other Enlightenment thinkers. But the thing is, their books were always not the most popular. The popular books were always arty kind of books. The first type was book about scandal, which is obvious. The writers would mix up some factual and fictional information to do character assassination of those in power. The second type is the more interesting one. It can be summed up by an image. Erotic literature. At first glance, none of them are truly philosophical by nature. They are not books that provide critical thought or knowledge that challenge preconceptions, especially the last type. So why they are still called philosophical books? The simplest reason is due to the French authority having a hard time defining the genre of forbidden books. A more nuanced answer is that there really is philosophy in those books. For example, one of the stories shows a priest having intercourse with a woman, but he's not seen as emotionally engaged. He is, however, teaching theology while doing so. The reason why erotic literature was written like this was because provocative stories sell, but the writers were nonetheless still an intellect. Hence, there would be philosophical discussion. And it is exactly because they are made by intellectuals, so this kind of erotic literature is more than just unserious work. A lot of the time, we will find characters who engage in misconduct are people in positions of power, not just any common people. In other words, it's somewhat of a transgressive art that tries to attack authority by showing vanity. Those who have power like to show the image of something holy, powerful, and absolute. But this kind of erotic literature exposes them as people who have a common desire, someone who is filthy and know better than us. Now, after all these rambles, it's important to see how the sentiment during the French revolutions compare with the thing we see in the anime. In the anime, it seems to portray characters having these fanatic obsessions over this idea of truth, so much so that they have no regard for their own safety. But as we have seen, even during a true revolution, people weren't thinking how to self-sacrifice. They still value their own lives. They have their own way to communicate their discontent. Another point is why this idea of truth-seeking must accompany by baggage of big words and loaded meaning. Throughout the anime, the proof of heliocentrism always surrounds itself with the topic of heaven and earth, life and death. In episode 9, there's even a whole mini sequence glorifying the intentions of words. This path of truth is painted as something noble and heavy duty. It can be something as mundane as slander. It can be as trivial as erotic literature. This battle of truth can always only be threatened by the significant. In this case, is the story meaningful because it has something to say, or there's no story to tell because the truth is just great? The meaning is projected when big words like heaven and earth are used. How much sacrifice is needed before it turns into an example of kitsch? These bring us to the next topic. Truth alone is not self-sufficient. We also need
この真理は美しいか。
美しかったのか。
あの美しさの一因だったのかもしれない。
Perhaps the anime taps into the wonder of the world, and that's why it resonates with many. Beauty in nature is something humans have a natural inclinations toward. By reintroducing how this beauty was discovered, we will once again be amazed by the world that we are living in. If that's the case, then the word beauty under this context represents itself as something universal, a concept that is unchanging and across time and space. Except when the very first instance, beauty is used in the anime, it is used to describe faith, and faith for a particular religion. Even the opposite of beauty, ugly, is used with a religious connotation. It's not surprising to hear characters who advocate heliocentrism to view aesthetic with a religious sense. After all, Galileo was a Catholic. Giordano Bruno, who got burned alive, was a priest. But if these discoveries of heliocentrism represent how natural science can discover the profound beauty of nature, then why this story must take place in medieval century Europe? This scientific fact should inspire similar stories across different continents. If that's not the situation, then this very localized concept of beauty should sound foreign to audiences who live in the 21st centuries, especially when these stories originated from Japan. In truth, there's no reason why the topic of heliocentrism will be any more fascinating than any other cosmological facts. Even conspiracy theories find it harder to believe the Earth is round than to believe the Sun is at the center of the solar system. So linking beauty to this cosmological fact is a fundamentally wrong reading of the show. Because if so, then the story could take place in ancient Japan and it would be equally interesting. The fact that it didn't seems to hinge on the fact that these definitions of beauty comes with persecution. It's a battle about definition, a struggle for depiction. Both claim to have the right reading of the world, but the answer can only be recognized as beautiful if the wrong one exists. This is where we need to talk about the author Uoto. In Uoto's work, it mentions theory like nominalism, quotes someone like Seneca, and name-drop theologians like Occam. These are all signs that he did his research. And if he really did his research, then this must mean that he must have come across some common misconceptions people have about the history of proving heliocentrism. For example, there were no mass burning at stake. Giordano Bruno was the only known figure who suffered that, and they still continue discussions about the true reason for his execution. Some suggested that he got burned because he really committed heresy and had nothing to do with his cosmological view. Galileo was put on house arrest for being vehemently suspect of heresy. Because when he was asked to provide proof for his theory, he provided no logical reason and just kept on insulting others. If you try to search the actual number of deaths due to the belief of heliocentrism, you will find no actual number. Unlike the witch hunt, the struggle to prove heliocentric model has always been an exaggerated historical event. And the author knows this. Quote, while we have the impression that heliocentrism was allegedly suppressed, it actually seems not to have been so in real history, at least not to that extent. Nevertheless, many modern people misunderstand the severe suppressions that actually occur. I find this misunderstanding attractive, and it is indeed one of my motives to deal with this topic as a manga. So the unending topic of beauty in the show actually predicates itself on the exaggerations of misconception. Now we have arrived to the reason why I wanted to make this video. I started off this video by talking about a character who wants to write a story about their own stories. And just like any story, there's a central conflict. In this instance, the conflict between geocentrism and heliocentrism. It dramatized the notion that proving heliocentrism right would be an earth-shattering event. It claims that it would cause chaos among societies. But the thing is, we who live in the future already knew what had happened. Nothing happened. Heliocentrism alone didn't collapse anything. So maybe we should appreciate the admirable disposition that people possess in the story. But then it turns out if we look at some real historical period, when people were chasing these ideas of truth, they were never this nobly obsessed. They didn't just bring down old system with remarkable theories. So if the characters are depicted as this nobly obsessed, then why didn't they turn into a caricature? That being said, maybe we should try to look at it from the point of view of human emotion. There's always a sense of awe trying to understand nature. Except the story constantly reasserts that this sense of awe in nature only works in a religious sense, a cultural specific interpretation that only exists in that time and space. While at the same time, all this valiant effort to prove the right theory is known from misunderstanding, and the author noticed. He knew the misconception was strong enough to make this into a story. My whole experience watching Orb is like eating a nothing burger, where the only ingredient is layers of onions. My point of intention, however, isn't directed toward the author. After all, one can only recognize what he has said when he sees the reactions of others. So Uoto would not have known he had made a great choice if audience hadn't replied. Therefore, I wanted to know how others perceive the anime after knowing all this. How is that a story about heliocentrism can cure a phobia, resolve trauma, change your life attitude, and overcome the fear of death, while still being believable? Especially if you know everything has been so dramatized. At that point, it turns the theory into panacea. Another food for thought is that, would it be equally interesting if the show is about magic? A story where a new magic system is discovered, and 90% of the time, we see characters study this magic by looking at symbols, looking at them, looking at things, looking at power books waiting to be looked at, and being tortured for looking at the wrong things. What are we looking then, if not feelings that have been manufactured?
I'm kidding around, of course.